Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Welcome back to CBSN. The Taliban is unveiling its newly formed government just one day after claiming to have seized full control of Afghanistan. The Taliban is reportedly cracking down on its opposition across Afghanistan. The crackdown comes after the group reclaimed the country following 20 years of war. Militants were seen firing weapons into the air in Kabul on Tuesday. Hundreds were sent scattering after gathering in Afghanistan's capital to protest the country's new leadership. The demonstrations come a day after the Taliban claims to have captured the last uncontrolled province in the country. CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata is in Doha, Qatar, with more.
They raged in Kabul again today, anti-Taliban protests that are growing in size and fury by the day. Heavy gunfire broke out, shots fired to disperse the crowds, sending people scrambling. The protesters include many women shouting freedom, other demonstrators yelling death to Pakistan for meddling in Afghanistan.
They beat a woman who took off the Taliban flag.
Another demonstration held in the north of the country in support of women's rights. Each protest a bold gamble against a regime known for its extreme brutality. As the Taliban tightens its grip on power, the U.S. State Department says an American family of 4 was able to flee overland. But there's growing outrage over Americans and Afghans still stranded in the country. Satellite images show 6 evacuation planes at the Mazar-e-Sharif airport amid accusations they've been grounded by the Taliban for nearly a week. Marina Legree is the founder of Ascend Athletics, a group helping Afghan women and girls trying to get out.
The U.S. government has contacts with the Taliban. I mean, these are the same people we've been negotiating with for a very long time in Doha. Surely there's some outreach that could be done and some levers that could be pulled to release these people.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is here in Doha holding high-level crisis talks with the government here. He said they're in touch with around 100 U.S. citizens who are still in Afghanistan, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that those charter flights are able to leave safely. Tanya?
Charlie D'Agata, thank you. Joining us now on the phone for more on the escalating tensions with the Taliban is CBS News correspondent Christina Ruffini. Hi, Christina. So, as we just heard, there are roughly 100 Americans still in Afghanistan. What is being done to evacuate them from the country?
Well, the State Department has said they're looking at all options, and that includes overland routes. Actually, while we were in the air about to land in Doha, a senior official came back and told us that the State Department had facilitated the evacuation of 4 Americans, who we later found out were a family, out over land. And that's something we're having to look at now that the Kabul International Airport is no longer an international airport. And there have been so many problems with these private charters in and out. The U.S. government is not really officially evacuating people by airplane anymore, but they are looking at alternatives, including this overland route. Now, they say the Taliban did know about that evacuation as it was happening and did not stop it. So I guess that's promising.
Right. And Christina, to your point, we've been hearing reports that the Taliban is holding charter flights with American citizens on board hostage and not allowing them to leave the airport. You pressed the secretary about this. I'd like to play some of what he had to say.
On these charter flights, as I mentioned, one of the challenges has been that, as we understand it, there are groups of people who are grouped together, some of whom have the appropriate travel documents, an American passport, a green card, a visa, and others do not. And it's my understanding that the Taliban has not denied exit to anyone holding a valid document, but they have said that those without valid documents at this point can't leave. But because all of these people are grouped together, that's meant that flights have not been allowed to go.
So, Christina, is the bottom line that the Taliban is using these flights and their passengers as leverage? And if so, what can the administration do about it?
It's a little bit unclear. The State Department has said they're not aware of any hostage-type situation, right? The Secretary said that today. They said there are not passengers being held on planes, and as far as they know, the Taliban is upholding its pledge to let anyone with proper documentation leave the country. The problem is a lot of these people don't have proper documentation. A lot of them are people who have worked for NGOs, or there's an Afghan women's mountain climbing team. These are not people who have SIV visas or necessarily even have those other qualifying visas like a P2 visa, which you can apply for if you've worked with an American organization. These are, however, people who believe they are at risk now that the Taliban has taken over, and they do require special status and protection from the U.S., but they don't have any paperwork to say that. And there is no U.S. embassy anymore in Kabul, so there's no way to get them that paperwork even if they qualified. So there are these charter flights being organized by private organizations. The State Department says it's doing what it can to help facilitate landing rights in third-party countries, get those flights somewhere to land once they come out of Afghanistan. But the State Department has emphasized it does not control the airspace. It does not have any bodies in Mazar-e-Sharif, which is where this airport is, and it has no control over who's letting the planes off the ground because it's not in Afghanistan anymore, and that really is up to the Taliban. So they're punting a little bit. They're saying they can help where they can. They're saying that these are, this is not a hostage situation, but they didn't really answer directly when I asked them if they were being used as leverage by the Taliban to get more out of the United States.
And Christina, you have seen the situation on the ground in Doha firsthand. How are the conditions in the compound there where many of the refugees are being held?
Well, look, the conditions we saw today are vastly improved. I've spoken to a lot of guys on the ground while we were here over the last 24 hours. I spoke to a group of Air Force guys today who were telling me that before we got here, at the peak of the evacuations, when they had tens of thousands of folks in these warehouses, that there was literally human waste on the ground. There were kids in bare feet running through it. At some point, these are people in the Air Force were volunteering just to take out the trash because there's so much trash from so many people. That's what needed to be done. Now, they have had about 50,000 people come through Al Udeid Air Base where we were today. Just to give you some perspective, it was quite literally 106 degrees in the shade. It's hot. We went into one of the big hangars. It was filled with cots. Now, the cots were empty because all those people that were in there, about 8,000 people, have been processed and moved on to different countries, either to the U.S. or other places where they're going to be hosts for a longer time while their paperwork is filled out. There still are several thousand refugees on that base. Or evacuees, depending on their status. And one of the issues here, like the issues with the charter plane, is paperwork. There are a lot of people who got on those flights out of HKIA, that's the airport in Kabul, without any kind of visa, without any kind of identifying documents. So they're here. The Qataris don't want them just wandering around their country. It's a security risk. The U.S. doesn't want to just put them on planes. It's a security risk. So they've got to wait until they can take the time and process all these people and security check them. And that's going to take a little while. One of the other places we went is this place called Doha Village. It's actually a lovely group of these little townhomes that was built for the World Cup. Now it's being used to hold Afghan refugees, including a lot of children. There's a nursery we saw, and I ran into a group of men outside what looked to be some sort of a community center. And they said, look, we're really, really grateful. They asked me to thank Secretary Blinken personally for saving their lives. However, they're in some sort of bureaucratic limbo. None of them had SIVs. None of them had P2 visas. They said they all worked for media organizations or some sort of qualifying entity, or they were going to apply for asylum, but they hadn't done that. And they were getting very little communication from the State Department, and they didn't know how long they were going to stay there. One man said to me, if it's 6 months, that's okay. I understand. I just need to know that, and we're not hearing from anyone. So a lot of people have moved on, but a lot of people are still stuck, and there's a lot of problems still. The story is not over.
Sure, for sure. And, you mentioned the children. What more do we know about the number of kids currently being sheltered there for processing?
So CBS News has reported that about last week, that number we believe was about 230 children. While we were standing in the hall, we were pushed out of the room at one point so Secretary Blinken could meet with the Afghan girls robotics team, and they wanted to have a private conversation. We saw them wheeling in a board that said there were 210 children at that compound, that villa compound. I did find a Qatari official who was more than happy to speak to me, and he said that number is about right. It fluctuates. A lot of those children are unaccompanied. We don't have a read on exactly how many of them are unaccompanied, but I saw small children wandering around the campus. I'm not sure if their parents had sent them out to the little store to get things or if they were just on their own. I spoke to one boy who looked to be about 10. I said, do you speak English? And he kind of balked. But then I said, are you okay? And he said, yes. And I said, is everything good? And he gave me a big smile and said, very happy. I mean, look, the conditions are very good, and that's something we heard. The conditions here are very good now, but it's just not these people's home. You know, they want to go on to family in America. They want to go on to a permanent place. And this is not it. And for these kids, it's very hard to track down where their families are, especially since so many of them are undocumented. And we haven't really gotten good answers from the State Department about what they're planning to do. They said they've worked with the UNHCR, that's the refugee wing of the United Nations, and these kids are under their care. But as far as whether they come to relatives in the U.S., whether they go back to relatives in Afghanistan, that's really not clear, and that's one of the outlying questions that's going to have to be solved, and we'll just keep asking it until they give us some sort of an answer.
A lot to work out there. Christina Ruffini, thank you so much for sharing your fabulous reporting with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go find some air conditioning.